Now that we've talked about the intertestamental period, the way the Romans came into ruling over the Hebrews, and now we've talked about how the Romans ran their government and Roman background, now we're in a position to put the two together, to talk about the specifics of the Roman province of Judea and how the Romans ran the thing. This first slide is rather a nice one, and it gives us a good picture, I think, of what we encounter when we bring Rome and Judea together under the auspices of a client king. This is a coin produced by King Herod the Great. And so you can read his name in Greek if you're so inclined, going around the coin. But also this is a coin that was honored by the Romans. So this is a Roman coin produced independently by a client king who is ruling in Rome's name, but it puts the king's name on the coin and not Rome. Also, you'll notice that the coin does not have any pictures of people on it. Roman coins tend to have the head of the emperor on it. This does not have the head of Herod on it, out of respect for Hebrew sensibilities about graven images. So let's talk about this client kingdom that we call Roman Judea. Herod the Great gained authority by the Roman Senate to become client king over the kingdom, over the Roman province of Judea in 40 BC. He did so under the supervision of the legate of Syria to the north. Herod's family were Idumeans. They were sort of Jewish by religion, but they were also willing to take certain liberties. And the Romans were comfortable with that, but certainly not all Jews were terribly comfortable with that. Herod the Great will rule until 4 BC. And Herod was an extraordinary ruler in his own right. He was a great builder, built extraordinary things. He rebuilt the temple on a lavish scale. So the temple is still the second temple, but he did a massive remodel job, including a large expansion of the southern courtyard where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today. He also did a number of great building projects around the empire, around Judea, such as Caesarea, such as Masada, such as Herodion, a palace at Jericho, some really extraordinary buildings that Herod built, and give us some idea of a man who was a true artist in many ways when it came to great architectural projects. Herod died in 4 BC. He died, according to Josephus, of a horrible disease, that some sort of intestinal or testicular cancer that caused him to his sort of abdominal region to putrefy and smell terrible, and people complained about being anywhere near him. It was just a horrible scene. And after he died, his sons, he named his sons rulers after him. Now, Herod had killed some of his children. He had killed a number of people around him. He became very paranoid in his old age, but 3 of his sons survived him. Unfortunately, for the most part in the literature, these 3 sons are called Herod. And so we have Herod, and then we have the 3 Herods. And then the 3 Herods are succeeded by other Herods, and this really gets confusing. So in the New Testament, all these guys are called Herod, so we have to be pretty clear about which Herod we're dealing with. So for a few minutes here, we need to deal with the history of the Herods. When Herod died in 4 BC, he left his kingdom to 3 sons, and they split it up. One, the eldest son, his name was Archelaus, Herod Archelaus. We'll call him Archelaus, but remember, in the New Testament, in other places, he is called Herod. Second was Herod Antipas. We'll call him Antipas, but remember, Herod, he just shows up as Herod. This is the Herod, by the way. Herod Antipas is the one who, when Jesus has a trial before Herod, that's the Herod. Herod Antipas was tetrarch of Galilee, so he ruled over that area where Jesus spent a lot of time. Herod Archelaus, by the way, was called ethnarch of Judea. He ruled in Jerusalem. The third son was Herod Philip. We'll call him Philip. He ruled in Gaulanitis, what we now call the Golan Heights, the northeastern part of the Sea of Galilee, and then down around on the eastern part of the Jordan River. So those are the three sons: Archelaus, Jerusalem; Antipas, Galilee; Philip, Gaulanitis, and that eastern portion. Now, let's follow their careers in order. First, Herod Archelaus, ethnarch of Judea. He reigned until only 6 AD, so he lasted for 10 years. There is no 0. There's a 1 BC and a 1 AD. He reigned from 4 BC to 6 AD. In 6 AD, there was a tussle with some Jews in Jerusalem. He retaliated by killing thousands of Jews in the streets of Jerusalem during the Passover. They complained to the emperor, and the emperor said, "That's crazy. We don't want him around anymore," and exiled him. So in 6 AD, Herod Archelaus was exiled. He's no longer going to rule in Judea. Now, it's very important what the Romans did at this moment. 6 AD. The Romans decided to leave the other two Herod sons alone. So Antipas is going to stay in Galilee, Philip's going to stay in Gaulanitis, but the Romans are going to rule directly just in Judea, just in the south around Jerusalem. In that year then, 6 AD, the Roman legate of Syria, his name was Quirinius, read your Gospel of Luke, Quirinius commissioned a census. And he counted all the people in the area and so on. And we know a lot about this because we know it from Roman sources, we know it from Josephus, we know about this because some Jews, in particular Jewish zealots, really hated the idea of Rome ruling directly, and the idea that the Romans were going to have a census meant that the Romans next were going to send the tax collectors. They really didn't like it, and a guy named Judas of Gamla launched a revolt against the Roman Empire that the Romans had to put down. It was a short-lived thing, but this census, Quirinius, Judas of Gamla, this short-term revolt, this left an impression on people. Only in Judea. The Romans then established a prefect in Judea, and the Romans are going to rule that portion directly, even though they're still going to have a client kingdom, a client king ruling in Galilee, Herod Antipas, and in Gaulanitis, Herod Philip. So that snapshot, 6 AD, a change in how this whole thing's going to be arranged. Eventually, Herod Antipas will die in the year 39. Herod Philip will die in the year 34. When those two guys die, the Romans will pick up and rule their areas directly. So the Roman prefect in Judea is then in 34 going to pick up Gaulanitis and add it to his jurisdiction. And in the year 39, he's going to pick up Galilee when Antipas dies. And so then in 39, for a brief moment, the Roman prefect in Judea is going to rule the whole thing. And then the title changes to procurator, but it's a Roman ruler ruling directly. It's only going to last a very, very short time because the Romans will reestablish another Herod as client king. In the year 37, they're going to bring in Herod Agrippa, who will be called King of the Jews. He is the grandson of Herod the Great, and he will rule from 37 to 44. You'll read about his death in the book of Acts, a gruesome story that we'll talk about later. When he dies in 44, the Romans will bring in a procurator again, and the Romans will rule directly for a little while, and then the Romans will decide, let's go back with the Herod family, and they'll bring in Herod Agrippa II in 53 AD, and he'll reign in part for a while. My point in all of this is it's a mess. You have Herods, you have prefects, you have procurators, sometimes fully client kings, sometimes partially client kings, sometimes a procurator or a prefect being over part of the area, sometimes the whole area. It's very, very messy. This is why you see, for example, Jesus undergoing a trial not only by Pilate, but also by Herod Antipas, because there's a jurisdictional question here, right? Jesus is from Galilee, that means he's under Antipas. Well, wait a minute, he's in Judea, that means he's under Pilate. Which one is it going to be? Well, it's kind of both. This is awkward. It's confusing, and it makes it all the more confusing because all these people are called Herod in the New Testament. But now you know, and now you know to ask. Every time you run into Herod, at least look at the footnotes, because you'll probably figure out which Herod it is, or you probably at least want to ask, which Herod am I dealing with at this point? This is then the saga of the Herodian family and the Roman direct rulers during the first century. And it's this rather confusing setting that sets the backdrop for the book of the Gospels and also the book of Acts.